And welcome to the History Roulette podcast. I'm your host, Marissa May Scott. I'll see you somewhere in history because you never know where you may end up. Hello, and welcome to the first full-length episode of History Roulette podcast. I'm so excited that you're here. I'm so excited that we're doing the thing. We're filming, we're recording the first full-length episode, and I hope that you are just as excited as well to join me on this adventure, because you never know where we may end up. I'm your host, Marissa. So, as I was thinking about what to start this podcast, what topic should I use for the first episode, it only made sense that I use a topic, an overarching topic at least, that will hopefully launch us in different directions for this episode that I'm incredibly familiar with, which is the American Civil War. I like to jokingly say that I did not pick the Civil War. The Civil War picked me at a young age and has kind of been the catalyst for me to continue to research and want to research. So it only makes sense that I start with a topic that I do know incredibly well, have studied for so many years, but I still don't know everything. So hopefully I'll learn something. Hopefully, definitely, you learn something. Let's get started. So I decided, as of today, as of filming this, recording this, it is August 8th, 2025. You're not going to be listening to it on August 8th, but I digress. I typed in Google, what happened August 8th, Civil War, just to see what was going on in those 4 years of war, of the Civil War. And what came up was actually very interesting. It came up with a topic that I'm a little familiar with, but not quite, which is the H.L. Hunley. So back 25 years ago, on August 8th, 2000, the H.L. Hunley was raised from the Atlantic Ocean in Charleston, South Carolina. So you might be wondering what the H.L. Hunley was. Well, let me tell you. The H.L. Hunley was a Confederate submersible. It was the first submersible credited in the distinction of being the first submersible to sink an enemy warship during wartime. It sunk the USS Housatonic on February 17th, 1864, and after it sunk the Housatonic, it disappeared. No one knew where it went. They had ideas, but they didn't know, and it was lost for 131 years. And then, 131 years later, they found it off the coast of South Carolina, 4 miles off the end. Well, I don't think it was 4 miles off the entrance, but it was in the Atlantic Ocean near the Charleston Harbor. It sunk. It was pulled out to sea afterwards. So before we get too much into the H.L. Hunley, though, why don't we jump backwards? Submarines. Now, I don't know about you. Me personally, you could not pay me enough money to work on a submarine. I personally do not like tight, small, confined quarters with only a singular exit. No, thank you. No. God bless those who choose that, who want that. I appreciate you, as I am not someone who has any desire to be doing that. But let's look at submarines, because I had no idea. I knew that the H.L. Hunley was a submarine, but I have no idea the history of submarines, just because personally, when I'm researching war and times of war, I primarily focus on infantry, the naval side of things, maritime, marine, the ocean. It's not really my interest. So let's take a look of the history of submarines. So as always, all of my sources will be in the description box below. So if you want to continue researching, you may. I personally, just so you know, try to find sources that are reputable. So do with that information what you will. So, submarines. This is found on the Naval History and Heritage Command. Underwater exploration has fascinated people for thousands of years, which makes sense, but submarine travel didn't really become common until recently. Ancient Athenians used divers in secret mission operations, and a legend maintains that Alexander the Great descended into the seas in a primitive diving bell. I never knew that. Interesting. We're getting a little bit of Civil War history as well as ancient world history. So, given that submarines have been around, the idea of using submersibles has been around for a very, very long time. So, fast forward to the Revolutionary War, which I didn't realize that they were fooling around with submersible technology in the Revolutionary War. I feel like in the back, like my subconscious was like, yeah, you listened to something, you listened to a podcast about this. But again, naval history is not my specialty. So the first American submarine was designed before the Revolutionary War. So 90-ish years before the H.L. Hunley ever even was designed on the docks in Mobile, Alabama in 1863. 90-ish years, they were experimenting with submersible technology during the Revolutionary War, or actually before the Revolutionary War. A designer by the name of David Bushnell, a young inventor from Connecticut, is the one who came up with it. He designed and built a one-man submersible vessel that he called Turtle, because it looked like a turtle. It was hand-cranked, so it featured a hand-cranked screw-like oar that moved the boat forward and backwards underwater, air pipes that brought fresh air into the boat, ballast tanks that took on water to dive and emptied to ascend, and a primitive torpedo to attack enemy ships. He was encouraged by George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and he adapted his vessel to use against the British during the war. The Turtle was sent to New York Harbor in September of 1776 to surprise the British ships blockading the city. Turtle's pilot, Ezra Lee, crept up on the HMS Asia and attempted to attach the explosives on the side of the wooden ship, but failed to do so. And he escaped. They ended up utilizing the Turtle several more times, which is really shocking to me that 90-ish years before the H.L. Hunley, they were utilizing submersible technology and it actually worked in the sense of bringing the crew back to the surface as opposed to the crew not surviving. Interesting. According to this, it was successfully launched, and it was successfully launched 2 more times. Sadly, though, it did not follow through with what the purpose of it was, which was, destroying British ships during the Revolutionary War. Eventually, the Turtle was scuttled by the British. There you go. So the H.L. Hunley, of course, we have to say that it's the Confederates, but the first overarching American submersible was the American Turtle in the Revolutionary War. Now, fast forward 90-ish years, give or take, because I'm not going to do the math. I'm sorry if you'd like to do the math. By all means, I'm not a mathematician. I am a historian and actor. So, fast forward 90-ish years. We are in the throes of the Civil War, and the Confederates want to utilize submersible technology. Something that has always fascinated me about specifically the Civil War is all of the technological advancements that came from the Civil War, both in the military aspect as well as medical aspect. There are a lot of advancements taking place, which is kind of silly when you think about it, that it takes war for people to get creative, I guess. It's kind of an oxymoron. At least that's how I see it. War equals let's use our ingenuity and figure something cool out to beat our foe. Anyway, so 90-ish years later, you have the Confederacy wanting to use submersible technology. Now, you have to understand, in the American Civil War, at the onset of the Civil War, they came up with this plan called the Anaconda Plan, which, if you understand what an anaconda is, it's a snake, and a snake that specifically suffocates its prey. So the United States military came up with the plan, the Anaconda Plan, because you have all of these southern states surrounded essentially by the United States. So they created this plan and they said, we're going to cut, of course, automatically, it's cut off from the north because it only goes so far. We're going to cut off the Atlantic, off at the Atlantic Ocean, create a blockade along the Gulf, and then take the Mississippi River like a snake and slowly close in on them. So you have the Confederates wanting to utilize submersible technology, especially because they don't really have a navy for themselves. Let's look that up real quick. Confederacy, and Navy. I believe they don't have a navy or any ships at the onset of the war. So, the navies of the Civil War, you have two national navies. This is important information to understand when you're talking about naval war during the Civil War, or the naval aspect. So, as the Civil War raged on land, the two national navies, you have the Union and the Confederates, they created war on the water. The naval war was one of sudden and spectacular lightning battles, as well as continued and fatal vigilance on the coast, rivers, and seas. So United States President Abraham Lincoln set up the Union's first naval goal when he declared a blockade of the southern coasts. His plan was to cut off southern trade with the outside world and prevent sale of Confederacy's major crop, cotton. The task was daunting. The southern coast measured over 2,500 miles, and the Union Navy numbered less than 40 usable ships. The Union needed a brown water navy of gunboats to support army campaigns down the Mississippi River and in northern Virginias. The southern states had few resources compared to the north, a handful of shipyards and a small merchant marine, and no navy at all. So I was correct. They don't have a navy, they don't have ships, and yet they're trying to battle it out, especially because of the blockade, and trying to get supplies into the Confederate States. So you have all of this going on. The Confederacy really wants to utilize submersibles in order to also run the blockade to get to the other side. So fast forward. So the war starts in 1861, a little bit before that, with the election of Abraham Lincoln, but we're not going to focus on that right now. We're focusing on the H.L. Hunley. So 1863, and you have a man by the name of Horace Lawson Hunley, H.L. Hunley, who financially backs this building of this submersible, the H.L. Hunley. It was built in Mobile, Alabama, and it was constructed from rolled iron boiler plates with a custom cast iron fittings. And it was powered by a hand crank operated by a crew of 7. The 8th member was the pilot. He piloted the boat. And each end was equipped with a water ballast tank that could be flooded by valves and pumped dry by hand pumps, with many features that would become standard in later submarines, including diving planes and raised conning towers. The boat is a prime example of American technological ingenuity that characterized the Civil War period. So you have this idea. Now, the interesting thing about the H.L. Hunley is the failed attempts on practice dives. H.L. Hunley practice dives, in which they had to raise it several times. It was not a one and done situation. So, where are you? H.L. Hunley sinks for the first time. Now, again, going back to the American Turtle in 1776, where it was launched 3 times successfully and then scuttled, actually. Do with that information what you will. So August 1863, the H.L. Hunley sinks for the first time in the Charleston Harbor. So February 17th, 1864, when it was lost for a decade, not a decade, for a century, more than a century, it actually sunk beforehand. So, prior to its history-making attack on the USS Housatonic and then its disappearance, it had 2 previous run-ins with the bottom of Charleston Harbor. 2, not 1, 2. So, constructed in Mobile, Alabama, the vessel made its way to Charleston in the summer of 1863 in effort to disrupt the Union naval block, or the United States naval block of the city. You have the Union forces besieging the city from Morris Island and the recent losses in Vicksburg and Gettysburg. General Beauregard had a lot of hopes in the Hunley. So, after weeks of practice in the harbor, on August 29th, the fishboat was docked at Fort Johnson on James Island, waiting for sundown to be taken out by its new crew, led by Lieutenant John Payne, to attack the new Ironsides. That evening's attack would not happen. A surviving crew member, Charles Hasker, stated that the wake from the passing steamer caused the Hunley to sink, while an official report later stated that the sub became entangled in lines on the dock, forcing it on its side, filling open hatches with water. 5 crew members lost their lives, while 3 survived. Following the accident, Beauregard quickly called for the sub's recovery, and hired 2 local divers, Angus Smith and David Broadfoot, to pull her up from the harbor. So they pull it up out of the harbor. It's built, taken to Charleston, they practice, then they go to attack. It doesn't work. It sinks. They pull it up from the harbor. Well, guess what? About 2 months later, in October of 1863, another fatal accident occurs, and loss of another crew, a third and final crew. So they had this, the H.L. Hunley had 3 crews. The third final crew would be successful in the attack of the Housatonic a couple months later, in February of 1864. But it sank 2 times before that. Interesting. So, where do we go from here? You have experimental submersibles in the Civil War with the H.L. Hunley, who, again, she is credited. She is credited with the first attack. She sinks the USS Housatonic. It does what it set out to do, but what about further down the road? Because we now know in today's society, in today's military, that submersibles are still utilized. So let's take a peek at what happens after the H.L. Hunley and the experimental technology. Let me find it. As we know, it's successful. We know that they would go on and be successful with the use of submersible technology. So 10 years after the war, here it is, 10 years after the war, an Irish-born John Holland began designing and building submersibles, or submarines, in the U.S. Holland submitted his first submarine design in the U.S. Navy in 1875. So 10 years, exactly 10 years after the war, which at the time was dismissed as impractical. I wonder if the H.L. Hunley and the sinking of it and the losing of it caused them to consider it as an impractical tool for warfare. Seeing this rejection as a challenge, what a way to live. Take rejections as challenges. Be like, watch me. John Holland did. I wonder if John Holland also is connected to Holland Tractors. If we have time, we'll look that up. Go from water to the land real quick. Holland, so after he takes the rejection as a challenge, Holland quickly went back to the drawing board and redesigned and improved on the construction of these underwater boats. By 1888, the U.S. Navy recognized the potential, so now we're looking about 20 years after the war, 23, they recognized the potential for submarines in its fleet and held a design competition for a new underwater vessel. Holland won the competition and began building the submarine Plugger. I think that's how you say it, Plugger. 5 years later, after experiencing difficulties with Plugger, I don't know, Holland began working on another submarine that he named Holland 6. For his sixth submarine, Holland introduced a new method of propulsion. I can read. Using a gasoline engine. Holland designed a small, lightweight gasoline engine that turned the propeller while the boat cruised on the surface. The engine ran a generator, so he redesigns it. We'll leave it at that. Where he comes up with a better design. He was able to persuade the Navy in April of 1900 to purchase the submarine. And it was added to the fleet as the USS Holland 6 months later. So, at that point, it's like 40 years? No. Again, guys, I'm a historian and an actor, not a mathematician. Yeah, 40-ish years. So 1900, after the Civil War, John Holland is able to redesign the submarine, and it is added to the U.S. Navy fleet as the USS Holland. Very cool. So there you have it. A little bit of a history of the submarines, the use of submarines. I find it really cool that they were able to eventually find the USS Hunley, not the USS Hunley, my apologies, the CSS Hunley, or the HL Hunley. They raised it 136 years later on this day, August 8th in 2000, so 25 years ago. And you can go visit it in Charleston, actually, which is really interesting. There's also a museum here in Virginia, which I can't remember the name of it, where they have a replica of like what it would have been like to be in a submarine, like the Civil War submarine. Again, you could not pay me enough money. Could not at all. They say that they utilized candles not only for light, but in the Hunley specifically, they utilized candles for light, a little bit of light, because it's hand cranked. You're hand cranking this thing, as well as to identify the level of oxygen within the vessel. And if it starts flickering, you know that your oxygen is going bye-bye. No thanks. Well, real quick, before I say goodbye, let's look up John Holland submarine. I really want to know, was he a part of submarine tractors? ? Was he the inventor of... Did John Holland invent... Or I could just type in who invented Holland tractors. Who invented Holland tractors? Real quick, because I'm curious. That's the point of this podcast. Something sparks. Also, it's New Holland. My apologies. My father will be very sad. Having grown up on a farm. No. He did not find, you know what I mean. New Holland agriculture. That was a man by Abe Zimmerman. There you go. So not only did you learn about submarines and the Civil War, but a little bit about New Holland tractors. There you go. Anyway, well, I am so glad that you joined me on this first episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something new about something. Doesn't matter. And as always, I'll see you next time, because you never know where you may end up. I'm your host, Marissa Scott, and this is the History Roulette Podcast.